Primary rule: glass protects by invitation, not force. I learned that before the shutdowns, standing on ladders in windstorms replacing panes that never broke by accident. Glass fails when it's challenged directly. It survives when it convinces you not to touch it in the first place. That rule is under pressure now. I wake before the sun reaches the ridge, when the greenhouse is still a dark volume and the temperature difference between inside and out hasn't started lying yet. First thing I do is walk the perimeter from the inside, slow, palm brushing the frame uprights. Aluminum talks when it's stressed. Not loudly. Just enough that you feel it before you hear it. Everything was quiet this morning. No new flecks. No tick pop from overnight cooling. I checked the roof trusses next. I doubled them months ago with scavenged conduit, not to stop collapse, but to change the way collapse would sound. A failing roof gives you a long warning if you let it. Still solid. Water after that. I keep it manual for a reason. Pumps teach people where to listen. Buckets don't. I dipped from the catch barrel and moved down the rows, feeding soil by hand. The beds are staggered on purpose. Nothing matures in unison. Nothing looks like abundance at a glance. Leaves overlap in uneven patterns, which matters when light hits glass and projects shapes outward. That's when I saw the line, not a trail, not crushed growth. Just leaves bent aside in a narrow, straight corridor near the rear wall, running parallel to the glass for maybe 8 feet before disappearing into intact foliage. No broken stems, no torn edges. Just displacement. Plants don't do that on their own. The dead don't either. They push. They tangle. They fall forward and stay there. This was height moving through space with intention and familiarity, like someone who knew how wide they were and didn't want to touch anything unnecessarily. I didn't follow the line. Following creates commitment. Commitment creates assumptions. I finished watering and covered the disturbed section lightly with soil from a neighboring bed, not to hide it, but to reset contrast. Patterns stand out more than damage does. Mid-morning, I vented heat. Same time as always. The sun was high enough that glare turned the glass into mirrors, throwing sky and tree canopy back at itself. From the outside, movement inside looks like reflection jitter. I cracked the vents just enough to bleed heat without changing silhouette. While the air moved, I listened. Greenhouses amplify small sounds in odd ways. A pebble on glass sounds like a knock. A bird strike sounds like a thrown tool. You learn to classify by pitch and decay time. Nothing new came through the structure itself. From the road, though, there was a different kind of quiet. The service road has been boarded for months. Not blocked solid, just enough that anything rolling up would have to stop and solve the problem. I don't want barriers that challenge. I want barriers that suggest effort isn't worth the answer. Yesterday evening one of those boards had shifted. Not pried, not broken, just rotated enough that the angle changed. Someone had tested weight or leverage, then put it back when it didn't give them what they wanted. That's restraint. I walked the inside edge of the rear wall again in the afternoon, checking the glass panes from a low angle. No fingerprints, no smears, no stress fractures radiating from a point of contact. Whatever moved there didn't lean, didn't press, didn't slip. They just passed. At dusk I checked supplies under the benches. Everything where it should be. Spread out. Redundancy intact. I don't stack anything important in one place. Breakage teaches you that fast. Night work is minimal. Headlamp low, hooded, never aimed at glass. Light through glass is a beacon even when it's dim. I move between rows by memory, counting steps, checking stems for new damage. Nothing else, which is worse than finding more. Isolation here works because the greenhouse looks wrong to approach. Too exposed, too fragile. Too much effort for an uncertain payoff. People don't like standing inside glass boxes unless they already know what they're getting. If someone has realized this place is still alive, then the glass stops being camouflage and starts being evidence. Glass doesn't forget. It multiplies presence. It turns small movements into signals if someone knows how to read them. Primary rule still holds. Glass protects by invitation, not force. The question is whether I'm still declining the invitation, or if the plants, the road, and the structure itself have already answered for me. Secondary rule. If something passes through without leaving damage, it's not testing strength, it's testing tolerance. I didn't change the routine the next morning. That was deliberate. Routine is a control variable. If I alter too much at once, I won't know which change triggered a response. I woke at the same time, walked the same loop, vented at the same hour. If someone is watching from a distance, consistency keeps them from learning anything new. Inside, the greenhouse behaved normally. Temperature rose predictably after sunrise. Condensation formed along the lower panes where cold soil met warming air, then cleared as the vents cracked. No new stress noises, no birds trapped inside, no insects behaving oddly. When systems change, the smallest occupants react first. They hadn't. The disturbed plants were still the only anomaly. In full daylight I crouched and looked at the stems from below bench height. Leaves bent, not creased. No snapped petioles. That means slow movement, controlled speed, and awareness of contact points. Someone tall enough that the leaves contacted thighs or hips, not hands. They didn't kneel. They didn't search the soil. They didn't pause. They were moving along the wall, not toward the greenhouse. That distinction matters. I checked the exterior sightlines next, not by going outside, but by looking through the glass at shallow angles. From certain positions, reflections stack and cancel, revealing what the structure hides from straight-on view. It's how I used to spot warped frames before storms found them. From the rear wall, I could see the tree line clearly enough to notice something new. A narrow gap in the underbrush where there hadn't been one before. Not a trail, too clean. Like someone had parted branches and let them fall back into place instead of breaking through. That lines up with the plants. Someone is moving parallel to the greenhouse, not approaching it directly. That's reconnaissance behavior, not scavenging. Scavengers push toward targets. Recon moves sideways, mapping without committing. By midday, I found the second signal. One of the seed trays under the western bench had been nudged just enough that it wasn't square with the others. Not lifted, not opened, just rotated a few degrees. If I hadn't been the one to align them originally, I might have missed it. That means entry. Not forced, not obvious. Someone knew where the door was, and how to open it without flexing the frame enough to make noise. I reinforced the doors early on for wind load, not intrusion. Glass doors fail loudly when challenged, but hinges fail quietly when understood. I checked the latch. Still intact. No pry marks. The gap between frame and door was unchanged. Whoever came in knew how to relieve tension before turning the handle. That narrows the field. By late afternoon, I made the first real adjustment. I changed how I vented. Same time. Same duration. Different pattern. Instead of opening opposing vents evenly, I vented from one side only, creating uneven airflow. That changes how humidity moves through the rows and how leaves respond. If someone is watching plant behavior from outside, subtle but possible, they'll notice inconsistency. At dusk, I didn't work the rows. I sat still on an overturned crate near the center and listened to the greenhouse settle. As temperatures dropped, the structure contracted. That's when new stress shows itself. Nothing did. Outside, though, there was a sound I hadn't heard before. A single footstep on gravel, far enough away that it echoed off the road boards instead of the glass. Someone testing approach noise, not trying to hide it completely. Then silence. Secondary rule applies because tolerance testing is about learning thresholds without triggering response. Whoever is moving here isn't trying to take the greenhouse yet. They're trying to understand how close they can get without changing its behavior. That's dangerous. A place that appears unguarded but responsive teaches people restraint. A place that appears stable no matter what teaches them entitlement. I need to decide which lesson this place is giving. Glass can decline an invitation quietly, or it can convince someone that nothing inside is paying attention. I can't let it do the latter. Tertiary rule. When a structure teaches restraint, someone will eventually try to exploit it. I woke to cold soil. Not frozen, just colder than it should have been given the overnight low. The thermal mass of the beds usually buffers temperature swings. When they don't, it means air moved where it shouldn't have. I checked the vents immediately, all closed. Same positions as I'd left them, no sign of tampering. Then I checked the rear wall again. The line in the plants was gone, not repaired, not grown back. Gone because the leaves had been repositioned carefully, bent back into their original overlapping pattern. Whoever did it knew which direction they'd displaced them before and corrected it. That takes memory. I stood still longer than usual after that. No movement, no routine. Just listening to the greenhouse wake on its own. Birds outside resumed their noise first, then insects. The structure creaked as the sun hit the aluminum unevenly. Normal sounds, nothing new layered on top. That's what unsettled me. Someone corrected evidence and left nothing else. Mid-morning, I found the third signal. One of the boards on the road barricade wasn't just shifted, it had been replaced. Same board, same nails, different orientation. Someone had pulled it free, tested the gap, then reseated it with care, driving the nails back into the same holes so the head sat flush again. That's not curiosity. That's rehearsal. They're practicing approach and withdrawal under low consequence, learning what can be altered without drawing attention. That tells me two things. They expect to come back, and they don't want me to know they were here until they decide otherwise. I stopped venting entirely that day. Let the greenhouse run hot. Risked the plants. Not enough to kill anything, but enough to change behavior. Leaves drooped, soil dried unevenly, condensation patterns shifted. From outside, the structure would look neglected, not tended. I also moved supplies, not consolidated, redistributed. Trays swapped between benches. Tools relocated slightly out of pattern. If someone enters again, they won't be able to rely on memory to move quietly. At dusk, I did something I hadn't done since the first week after the epidemic. I walked the outside perimeter. Not fully, just enough to read the ground. I stayed tight to the glass, using its reflections to mask my movement. From the tree line, I'd look like glare. The soil near the rear wall showed compression consistent with repeated passes. Same width, same stride length. One person, tall, balanced. No limp. Near the road, there were two sets of prints now, one heavy, one lighter. They hadn't crossed the barricade fully, just stepped up to it, shifted weight, stepped back. They're escalating slowly, the way you do when you don't want to spook prey. That tells me something else. They don't know how many people are inside. If they did, they'd force clarity. Call out. Knock. Demand response. Silence makes negotiation impossible, but it also denies them information. I went back inside before dark and shut down all visible light. No headlamp, no lantern. The greenhouse went fully dark as the sky faded, turning into a black mirror that reflected trees and stars instead of revealing rose. I moved only when clouds covered the moon. That night, I heard glass touched. Not struck. Touched. A fingertip sliding along a pane makes a sound you only hear from the inside, a faint squeal, like breath on metal. It moved slowly along the rear wall, paused, then moved again. They were counting panes, measuring spacing. That's when the decision window opened. If I stay silent and static, this place teaches them that restraint is safe, that they can come and go without consequence. Eventually, they'll decide to enter fully because nothing has punished the attempt. If I reveal myself overtly, I turn glass into a target, and myself into a variable they'll want to control. Tertiary rule exists because exploitation always follows understanding. I need to introduce uncertainty without revealing position, make the greenhouse feel alive, but not occupied. Tomorrow, I'll change how the structure answers touch, not loudly. Just enough that anyone paying attention realizes the place is no longer tolerant of rehearsal. Fourth rule. Uncertainty works best when it feels structural, not personal. I didn't wait for them to come back. If you respond only to intrusion, you teach timing. I needed to change the greenhouse's baseline behavior so the next contact wouldn't line up cleanly with the last one. Before sunrise, I altered tension. Every greenhouse frame carries stress in predictable ways. Thermal expansion, wind load, snow weight. You learn where it wants to flex and where it resists. I loosened 3 interior support braces by a quarter turn each, not enough to weaken the structure, just enough to change how it spoke when touched. Then I retightened one brace too much. Overtension is louder than looseness. It turns gentle contact into complaint. I also adjusted the door. Not the latch. The threshold. I shimmed it with a thin strip of aluminum scavenged from a broken vent arm so the door would drag slightly when opened inward, but only after the first few inches. From outside, it would still feel smooth at first. The resistance would come late, when momentum was already committed. That kind of feedback makes people stop and reassess instead of pushing through. I left the interior dark through the morning. No venting, no watering. Let the heat climb. Plants tolerate one bad day better than people tolerate unexplained change. By midday, leaves had curled defensively, casting shadows that broke the clean geometry of the rows. From outside, the place looked stressed. At 13:30, the first test came. A knock. Not on the door, on the frame beside it. One tap. Light. Careful, I didn't move. The second tap came lower, near where the glass meets aluminum. That's where vibration carries farthest inside. Someone trying to listen through structure, not sound. The frame answered them for me. A low, spreading creak rolled across the roof trusses as heat shifted load. Not loud, but wrong. The kind of noise that suggests accumulated stress, not presence. There was a pause. Then a hand on glass again. This time, the overtension brace complained immediately. A sharp metallic tick, followed by a slow settling groan that traveled upward and sideways, like the building was deciding whether to stay whole. That wasn't me. That was the greenhouse asserting itself. The hand withdrew. I waited until late afternoon to vent, and when I did, I vented unevenly again, rear vents only. That pulled air along the back wall where they'd been testing, creating a visible shimmer in the glass as hot air escaped. From the outside, it would look like something inside was shifting without pattern. At dusk, I watered one section heavily and left the rest dry. The smell of wet soil rose briefly, then dissipated unevenly. Smell that doesn't repeat teaches people not to trust their senses. Night came with cloud cover. Good. I moved then. Quietly, I reset the disturbed plants near the rear wall, but not perfectly. I left one leaf bent at an unnatural angle, like it had been brushed recently. Evidence that suggested activity, but not whose. Then I waited. They came back after full dark. 2 sets of steps this time. Gravel. Pause. Board creak on the barricade. Someone had stepped on it without subresisting the weight fully, testing sound. They approached the rear wall again. Glass touched. Then stopped. Someone whispered something. I couldn't make out words, but tone matters more. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was caution. The door moved. Just an inch. Enough for the shim to engage. The resistance came late, exactly as intended. The hinge protested softly, then the overtension brace answered with a sharp, echoing tick that carried the length of the structure. They froze. No follow-up, no push, no retreat sound either, just stillness. Then, after a long pause, footsteps moved away from the greenhouse, not back toward the road, but sideways, into the woods. They didn't want to be silhouetted against glass while deciding what they just learned. I didn't pursue. I didn't signal. I didn't correct anything. Fourth rule holds because people don't need to know you're there to feel unwelcome. They just need to believe the place responds in ways they don't control. Glass doesn't need to be strong. It needs to be unpredictable. Tonight, the greenhouse taught them that touch has consequences that don't map cleanly to cause. That buys me time, not safety. Time to decide whether this structure can keep teaching that lesson, or whether the lesson itself is becoming the reason they'll come back prepared. Fifth rule. Once a place starts teaching lessons, someone will try to master the curriculum. I slept lightly after that. Not from fear fatigue, but because the greenhouse didn't settle the way it usually does at night. The altered tension changed its cooling behavior. Instead of a slow, even contraction, the structure released stress in small, uneven ticks as temperatures dropped. Each one sounded like a decision being deferred. That's acceptable short-term. Long-term, it teaches patterns. At first light, I reversed part of what I'd done. Not all of it. Just enough. I loosened the overtension brace back to neutral and tightened one of the others instead. Same total stress. Different voice. The goal isn't to make the greenhouse loud. It's to make it inconsistent. Inconsistency erodes confidence faster than resistance. I also fixed the door shim. Not removed, repositioned. Now the drag happens immediately on opening, not late. Anyone testing it again will get a different response than last time. Memory becomes unreliable. Inside, I resumed care, but unevenly. I watered the dry beds first and left the soaked section alone. Leaves responded at different rates, changing canopy shape throughout the morning. From outside, the interior would look active but uncoordinated, like systems correcting themselves without human direction. That's the impression I want. By mid-morning, I found the next escalation. The woods behind the greenhouse were quieter than they should have been. Birds don't avoid glass. They avoid presence. When the soundscape thins unevenly, It means something larger is moving carefully enough not to startle everything at once. I didn't go to the rear wall. Instead, I knelt by the north corner and looked at reflections. Glass tells you what's behind you if you learn how to read angles. Between tree trunks and sky glare, I caught a distortion that didn't belong to either. Someone standing still, not close enough to touch, close enough to watch. They didn't move when a cloud passed and changed the glare. That's discipline. I continued working, not pretending not to see, pretending not to care. That's harder. People watching glass structures expect reaction, flinching, stillness, retreat. Any of those validate presence. Indifference suggests either ignorance or confidence. Both are dangerous to assume. Around noon the watcher moved. Not toward the greenhouse, away from it deeper into the woods, angling toward where the service road bends out of sight. They were repositioning to observe from a different vector. They're mapping behavior now, not probing access. That's worse. Probing wants entry, mapping wants control. I made another adjustment. I opened the roof vents wider than usual during peak glare, then closed them abruptly. The temperature inside dropped fast, enough to trigger condensation along upper panes. For a few minutes, water streaked down glass in uneven lines, distorting visibility entirely. From the outside, the greenhouse would look momentarily chaotic, light scattering, shapes blurring, reflections breaking. Then it cleared. Anyone watching lost continuity. In the afternoon, I checked the barricade again. One of the boards had been marked, not visibly. A faint scrape where something hard had contacted it at waist height. Tool handle, maybe. Measuring leverage points. Planning. I removed the board entirely and replaced it with a different one from deeper in the stack. Same size, different grain, different sound under pressure. Let them practice on the wrong surface. As evening came on, I accepted something I'd been resisting. This place is no longer neutral. Neutral places are ignored. Useful places are exploited. Responsive places are studied. The greenhouse has crossed into the third category. That doesn't mean it's lost. It means staying now requires more energy than leaving will, and that balance will only tilt further as the tension accumulates. I spent the last light of the day preparing, not to flee immediately, but to decouple. Supplies redistributed into 3 exit-ready bundles under separate benches. Seeds cached in sealed tins buried beneath a row that looks unproductive. Tools pared down to what I can carry without noise. I didn't pack. Packing implies commitment. I'm still deciding. Night fell. Clouds again. Good cover. I heard movement once more after dark, but farther away this time. 2 people. Talking quietly, no approach. Just observation. They're adapting. 5th rule stands. Once a place starts teaching lessons, someone will try to master the curriculum. I can keep changing the syllabus for a while, but eventually someone will bring notes. When that happens, glass stops being a deterrent and starts being a liability. Tomorrow, I need to decide whether this greenhouse can remain a problem that discourages effort, or whether my effort is now the most visible thing about it. 6th rule. When attention accumulates, effort becomes a signal. I made a mistake that morning. Not a dramatic one. Not something that broke glass or drew voices. The kind of mistake that comes from competence. Assuming I could keep adjusting faster than anyone could learn. I watered too evenly. It sounds trivial, but evenness is a pattern, and patterns are legible. The beds responded in synchrony. Leaves lifted together. The interior light softened uniformly. For the first time in days, the greenhouse looked well run instead of merely alive. I corrected it within the hour, but correction after the fact still teaches sequence. Anyone watching long enough learns what normal looks like and what deviation follows. I noticed the error because the birds came back all at once. Not gradually, not cautiously. A sudden return of sound across the woods behind the rear wall. That means, whatever pressure had been there stepped away quickly, not slowly. Someone moved off fast enough to release the soundscape in one motion. That's not repositioning. That's aborting. I stayed where I was and finished the task I was on. Staking a row that doesn't need staking yet, just to justify my posture if someone was watching through reflection. When you stop mid-task, it reads as reaction. When you finish it, it reads as routine. I didn't check the rear wall again until midday. When I did, the line in the planks had returned. Not the same one. This corridor was wider by a few inches and shorter, ending earlier, like someone had stepped in and stopped deliberately before reaching the previous limit. Leaves bent again without breakage. soil lightly compressed, not scuffed. They were recalibrating their own boundary. I knelt and pressed 2 fingers into the soil at the deepest compression point, still springy, no heel pivot. That suggests a single step, weight placed and removed once, not pacing. They're practicing entry without committing to presence. That's new. By early afternoon, I found the second sign of the mistake. One of the interior support braces I'd adjusted days earlier had been marked. Not moved. Not loosened. Marked. A faint scrape at the adjustment collar, as if someone had brushed it with a hard object while passing, just enough to confirm location and orientation. They hadn't turned it. They'd noted it. That means they were inside long enough to take inventory and disciplined enough not to change anything. I stood there longer than I should have after seeing that. Standing still is fine. Standing still after discovery is not. Your body does things your mind doesn't authorize. Breathing shifts, shoulders tighten, weight redistributes. Glass reads those movements. I forced myself to finish the perimeter walk at the same pace I always do, and only then allowed myself to think through what it meant. They'd been inside again, quietly, repeatedly, with time. The greenhouse had stopped being a test and started being a study subject. I needed to know whether this was one person with patience or more than one with roles. I waited until vent time. When the glare peaked, I opened the vents as usual but stayed near the north wall where reflection is worst. I watched the woods through the glass instead of the plants. At shallow angles, movement bends reflections in ways the trees don't. I saw 2 distortions this time, one closer, one farther back. The nearer one moved first, slow and deliberate. The farther one adjusted position a few seconds later, not in response to me but to maintain line of sight on the structure. 2 people. Coordinated but not tightly. No hand signals. No overt cues. They're comfortable. That comfort is the problem. I closed the vents and let the temperature climb again, not because the plants needed it, but because heat changes how glass reflects. As the interior warmed, the panes became mirrors again, erasing interior depth. I stepped back into shadow and waited. Nothing else happened that day. No knocks, no touches, no footsteps on gravel, just absence. Absence after contact is how people signal confidence. They believe they have enough information to proceed later without risk. That night, I didn't make noise. No headlamp. No movement between rows. I sat on the floor against the central bench and listened to the greenhouse cool unevenly, mapping every new sound in my head. If they touched the glass again, I wanted to know which pane, which height, which hand. They didn't. Instead, sometime after midnight, I heard the barricade boards creak in sequence. Not testing. Removal. One board came loose, then another, then stopped. Nails pulled just enough to create a gap, not enough to collapse the whole thing. Controlled effort. Quiet. They were changing the approach, not the target. That's when the calculation shifted. As long as the road stayed blocked, anyone coming here had to choose effort over curiosity. They had to commit before they learned anything. By altering the barricade carefully, they were reducing commitment without increasing visibility. They're building themselves a low-cost option. I can't allow that. But confronting them at the barricade turns me into a person defending a resource, and that reframes everything that happens next. People justify force more easily when they believe something is being hoarded. I need to make the road unreliable, not defended. Before dawn, I went out for the second time since all this started. I stayed low, kept the glass between me and the woods, and moved only when cloud cover flattened reflections. At the barricade, I didn't fix what they'd changed. I made it worse. I removed 3 boards entirely and dragged them 10 yards into the brush, then leaned them back against saplings at odd angles, half visible. From the road, it now looks like a partial collapse, not access. From the woods, it looks messy and unfinished. People don't trust mess they didn't make. I returned inside before first light, then resumed routine exactly on schedule. The greenhouse looked neglected again by mid-morning. Uneven water. Drooping leaves. No obvious care. From inside, though, I could feel the cost rising. Every adjustment now requires more thought than the one before it. Every hour spent managing perception is an hour not spent growing, resting, or preparing to leave. 6th rule holds because effort compounds. Once you spend more energy being unreadable than surviving, you've inverted priorities without noticing. I made one more mistake today. I started thinking about how to win this place back. That's not survival thinking. That's territorial thinking. Territory is what gets tested until it breaks. Tomorrow, I have to decide whether the greenhouse can still be made irrelevant, or whether my continued effort here is the clearest signal that it's worth mastering. 7th rule. Once a place demands defense, it has already chosen its next owner. I stopped correcting things. That was the decision, even before I admitted it to myself. No more counter-adjustments, no more structural replies to touch, no more lessons disguised as entropy. The greenhouse had become a dialogue, and dialogue requires participants. I needed to exit the conversation, not win it. The first test of that resolve came early. I woke to the sound of the door opening, not forced, not hesitant, just the hinge moving through its range the way it's designed to. No scrape, no brace complaint. Whoever opened it knew the new threshold behavior and compensated for it. I didn't move. Breathing slowed. Muscles stayed neutral. The instinct to prepare, to grip something, to shift weight, had to be suppressed. Glass reads preparation. Silence only works if it's complete. Footsteps entered. One set. Then another, a few seconds later. They stopped just inside, letting the structure settle around them. That pause told me everything I needed to know. They weren't surprised by the interior. They expected it. They moved down the north aisle first. Smart. Less glare from that angle in the morning. One of them brushed a leaf with the back of their hand, not bending it, just confirming texture and moisture. The other watched the roof trusses, tracking how the frame responded to their movement. Inventory again. They spoke quietly, but I caught fragments. Not questions. Statements. Still hot. Manual water. No rot. They weren't evaluating whether the greenhouse was usable. They were evaluating how long it had been usable. That reframes everything. I stayed seated against the central bench, knees drawn in, positioned where reflections collapsed, depth and shadow swallowed outline. If either of them had looked directly at me, they might have seen something human-shaped. They didn't. They weren't looking for me. That was the moment clarity arrived. They believe the greenhouse is either automated or intermittently tended by someone who avoids contact. A system, not a person. Systems can be taken over. People complicate that. They continued moving. One opened a supply bundle under a bench. Didn't take anything. Just looked. Another straightened a tray I'd deliberately misaligned days ago, then paused, reconsidered, and put it back wrong. They're testing authorship now. Seeing which changes persist. I let them. After maybe 10 minutes, they left the way they came. No rush. No cover noise. The door closed cleanly behind them. I waited a long time after that, not because I was afraid they'd come back immediately, but because my own thinking needed to slow down. Fast conclusions are how you turn confirmation into error. When I finally stood, I didn't check what they'd touched. I checked myself. Heart rate elevated but steady. No shaking, no tunnel hearing. That means the stress hadn't tipped into panic, useful information. I resumed work exactly as if nothing had happened. Watered one bed, not the others. Restaked the same unnecessary row. Left the door behavior unchanged. Let the greenhouse keep speaking in the same inconsistent voice. By midday, I saw them again outside. This time, 3. Standing near the barricade. One gesturing toward the greenhouse. Another shaking their head. The third watching the woods, not the structure. Division of roles. I recognized the posture now. Not hunters, not scavengers, managers. They're deciding whether to integrate this place into something larger. Whether the cost of taking it is lower than the cost of leaving it ambiguous. Ambiguity is expensive to maintain. It requires constant attention. They'll only tolerate that if the payoff justifies it. That's when I understood the final cost. As long as I stay, the greenhouse remains ambiguous. Responsive. Alive in ways that suggest oversight. That makes it valuable. That draws management. If I leave without severing that impression, the greenhouse becomes a prize. An intact, functioning system ready to be absorbed. I need to break that linkage. Not by destroying the place. Destruction invites salvage. Not by booby-trapping. That escalates. I need to make the greenhouse fail convincingly, not collapse. Drift. That afternoon, I stopped watering entirely. All of it, i.e. rule, absence must look accidental, not tactical. I didn't go far that first night. Leaving cleanly is louder than staying messy. People notice trajectories. They don't notice drift. I moved just deep enough into the woods that the greenhouse reflections couldn't find me anymore, then stopped in a shallow depression where last year's leaves still held moisture. No fire, no tarp. I let the ground decide my outline. Cold crept in, slow, honest. From there, I could still see the structure through gaps in the trees. At dusk, the cracked pane caught the last light and threw it wrong. Just a slight distortion, like a tired eye. Anyone watching would see it, and register delay, maintenance deferred, risk accumulating. That's the story I wanted the building to tell. I stayed awake longer than usual, listening for reaction. None came immediately, no rush of boots, no voices, no sudden confidence. That's good. Sudden response means interest. Delayed response means deliberation. Sometime after midnight, I heard movement on the road. Not careful this time. 2 people walking normally, letting boards creak. One laughed quietly when a plank shifted. They weren't afraid of noise anymore. Fear had decayed into entitlement. They reached the greenhouse and stopped. I couldn't hear what they said, but I heard how long they stayed still. Longer than before. The kind of pause you take when you're reassessing a plan that assumed control. Then the door opened. Light spilled out briefly. Headlamp this time, not hooded. A bright cone cutting rose, bouncing off glass. They moved faster inside than before. Less inventory. More assumption. That's the pivot. Once people believe a place is failing, they stop listening to it. I waited for the sound that would confirm it. Glass under load makes a different noise than glass under care. It complains more freely when no one's tending tension. The cracked pane answered right on schedule. A soft pop, followed by a spreading creak as the fracture adjusted to the temperature difference. Not dramatic, just enough. The headlamp cut out immediately. Someone swore under their breath. Another voice responded, low and irritated. They stayed another minute, maybe 2. Then footsteps retreated. The door closed hard this time. Not careful. They didn't fix anything. They didn't take anything. That tells me they've deferred ownership. Deferred is better than denied. Deferred buys decay. By dawn, the greenhouse looked tired. Condensation clung longer to the cracked pane. The interior humidity was wrong. Leaves sagged visibly. From the road, the place would read as one storm away from real failure. I stayed hidden until full daylight confirmed no one was watching anymore. Then I moved. Not straight away, sideways first, to break any line of reasoning that followed greenhouse to woods. I doubled back once, stepped through a shallow creek to break scent and track continuity, then angled out along terrain that didn't lead anywhere useful. I'm not relocating yet. I'm shedding association. The goal now isn't to find a new place. It's to become unanchored long enough that no one connects my movement to the structure they're still thinking about. By mid-morning, I stopped and took stock. Food, light but viable. Seeds, intact. Tools, minimal. Body, tired but clean. The hardest thing to leave behind wasn't shelter. It was certainty. The greenhouse had rules. Glass, heat, growth cycles. Predictable failure modes. Out here, everything negotiates constantly. No single system dominates long enough to learn its voice. That's uncomfortable. It's also safer now. 8th rule holds because once escape paths reveal themselves, others will follow them for you. The greenhouse has become a visible path to resources, effort, and control. I don't want to be near paths anymore. Tonight, I'll sleep somewhere that doesn't invite a story. Tomorrow I'll move again. Not away from the greenhouse, but away from the idea that survival requires a fixed solution. Glass taught me how to hide in plain sight. Now I need to learn how to disappear without leaving anything worth remembering. 9th rule: the moment a place becomes a reference, it stops being shelter. I kept moving without gaining distance. That sounds like a contradiction, but it isn't. Distance is what people measure. Movement is what breaks measurement. I stayed inside a loose triangle of terrain, creek bend, shallow ridge, patch of wind-felled trees, circling slowly so no single direction accumulated meaning. I didn't make camp. I made pauses. Short rests where my body cooled and the ground accepted my weight without complaint. No clearing. No arrangement. Just compression that rain and time would erase. By the second day, the greenhouse had started to fade from my thinking, not emotionally, structurally. I stopped asking what was happening there, stopped wondering if they'd fixed the pain or taken over the rows. Those questions are hooks. They tie attention backward. Attention backward makes you predictable. Instead, I narrowed focus to thresholds. How long I could move before hydration became the primary constraint. How much daylight I could spend under canopy before losing orientation. How much noise my pack made when the straps got damp. Those are solvable problems. Places are not. Midday I found water again. Not a stream. Just a shallow run that pooled in a rock bowl before disappearing underground. The kind of water people walk past because it doesn't look like anything. I filtered it slow and drank sitting down so my legs wouldn't lock when I stood. While I drank, I noticed something that made me stop swallowing halfway. The forest floor here showed disturbance, but not recent. Old compression. Weeks, maybe months. Leaves pressed and rebounded. Soil compacted in a straight line that didn't follow animal logic or erosion. A line that suggested repeated passage back and forth between two unseen points. A route. Not a road, not a trail. Something used infrequently but deliberately. I followed it for 10 steps and stopped myself. Curiosity kills quietly. Especially when you're tired enough to confuse discovery with opportunity. I stepped off the line and angled away, choosing ground that forced my feet to decide each placement instead of sliding into memory. If I'm honest, part of me wanted to know where that route led. That part is what the greenhouse trained. Systems thinking. Pattern completion. I don't get to indulge that anymore. By late afternoon, clouds built again. The light went flat, depth cues washed out. I used that to cross a shallow open area I'd been avoiding, keeping low and moving only when wind stirred the canopy enough to justify motion. On the far side, I found the first sign I'd been anticipating since leaving. Human absence. Not footprints or campsites. The opposite. An area that looked too untouched for its proximity to old infrastructure. No fire scars, no cut branches, no scavenging, nothing claimed. That usually means one of two things: it's useless or it's avoided. Both are good reasons to stop. I took shelter under a natural lean of rock and root, just enough to break wind and shed rain if it came. No improvement, no adjustment. The urge to make it better is what turns pauses into camps. I slept hard and dreamless. When I woke, it took me a moment to remember where I was. That disorientation is a gift. It means I haven't imprinted yet. Morning brought sound. Distant, but distinct. Engines. Not close. Not approaching. Just present enough that the forest carried it as information. That would be the greenhouse direction, I realized. Or something connected to it. They're committing. That confirmed the choice without requiring reaction. I stayed another day. Food dropped lower than I liked, but not dangerously. Hunger keeps movement efficient if you don't let it dictate pace. I moved only in the afternoon, when light made glass reflections irrelevant. And most people settle into tasks instead of travel. I crossed a shallow drainage that would complicate tracking, then climbed until the ground changed from leaf to stone and back again. Each transition breaks continuity in ways people don't think to follow unless they're already close. Near evening, I found a place that felt like nothing. No view, no water sound, no easy shelter, just uneven ground with enough variation to make stopping uncomfortable but not painful. That's ideal. I sat there and did nothing until dark. When night came, it came clean. No moon, no cloud glare. The forest collapsed into sound and smell again, and both were neutral. I thought about the greenhouse one last time then, not with planning, but with diagnosis. It failed because it became legible, not because it was glass, not because it grew food, not because people found it, because it began to answer questions. Every response I engineered, every noise, every inconsistency invited interpretation. Interpretation invites management. Management invites takeover. Out here, there's nothing to manage. That's the point. Ninth rule holds because reference points are gravity wells. Once something becomes useful to orient around, movement curves toward it whether you want it to or not. I don't want a curve. Tomorrow, I'll keep moving through places that don't reward memory, places that resist mapping, places where the only lesson is how to leave without learning anything. If I do this right, no one will ever know I passed through. Not because I hid. Because there was nothing here worth remembering. 10th rule. If the land offers no solution, don't force one. Let it refuse you. I woke cold enough that it took effort to remember why I'd chosen this spot. That's a good sign. When a place explains itself too easily, you start trusting it. This ground didn't explain anything. It just existed under me, uneven and indifferent, asking nothing and offering nothing back. I waited until my hands stopped lying about stiffness before moving. Morning light came in thin slices through the canopy, not enough to give direction, just enough to confirm that nothing had changed while I slept. No new sound layers, no pressure in the air that suggests movement nearby. Neutral. I stayed where I was longer than comfort justified. That was intentional. People move when they think something is about to happen. I wanted to move because nothing was happening. That distinction matters. It keeps you from reacting to ghosts. By mid-morning, hunger edged up from background to signal. I ate a small portion, not to satisfy it, but to quiet it. Hunger sharpens senses until it starts dictating pace. I don't let it cross that line. I moved after that, but not toward anything. I chose a bearing that threaded between shallow rises and low, wet ground terrain that forces micro-decisions without creating landmarks. I stepped where the leaf litter sounded wrong and avoided where it sounded right. Familiarity is the trap. Wrong sounds make you pay attention. Around noon I crossed another faint route. This one was newer than the last. Still not fresh, but the soil hadn't fully rebounded yet. Two-way traffic again. Same width. Same stride. This route intersected my line of travel at a shallow angle, then continued on. I stopped well short of it, and watched for 10 minutes. Nothing moved. That doesn't mean the route is inactive. It means it's predictable enough that no one is currently using it. That's worse. Predictable routes accumulate memory. Memory attracts reuse. I detoured wide, adding time and cost deliberately. The goal isn't efficiency. It's friction. Friction keeps you from sliding into other people's solutions. In the afternoon, the weather shifted. Not storm, just a pressure change that thickened the air and dulled sound. Leaves stopped rustling individually and started moving in blocks. That's when the forest becomes unreadable. Everything sounds the same. I slowed down. There's a temptation to hurry when sensory resolution drops, like you're trying to outrun uncertainty. That's backwards. Uncertainty punishes speed. I found a low rock outcrop that didn't offer shelter so much as interruption. The ground rose just enough to change drainage and force wind to split. I sat there and let the air move around me. While I waited, something clicked into place that had been circling my thinking since I left the greenhouse. I wasn't being followed. That's the wrong frame. I was moving through a landscape that already had intentions layered into it. Roots, avoidance zones, worked ground, and I was trying not to inherit any of them. That's harder than evasion. Evasion assumes pursuit. This is about refusing adoption. By late afternoon, I heard it again. Engines. Closer this time, but still distant. Not moving toward me. Parallel, maybe. The sound came and went as terrain folded it. They're expanding. Whatever group took over the greenhouse, or whatever it fed into, is growing its footprint outward, testing edges, mapping throughput. Engines mean commitment. Commitment means they'll start simplifying terrain to match their needs. Simplification is loud. I didn't react by moving away. I reacted by stopping. I stayed put until the sound passed fully out of earshot, then waited another hour. When people expand, they overshoot first, then retract to consolidate. That retraction phase is when they cross unfamiliar ground casually, assuming nothing's there. I moved after sunset. Night movement costs more, but it also breaks pattern inheritance. Most people avoid it unless forced. I moved slowly, counting steps between rests, keeping my silhouette below ridge lines and avoiding anything that would frame me against sky. I didn't use light. I let my eyes adapt and accepted reduced precision. Precision tempts speed. Approximation keeps you cautious. Near midnight, I reached a place that forced a choice. Ahead, the ground dropped into a shallow basin that smelled damp and alive. Likely water nearby. Useful. On either side, the land rose into dry, broken slopes that would cost more energy but offer less reason for anyone else to be there. This is where old thinking would choose water. I chose dry. I angled up and away, letting thirst build a little longer. Water draws paths, paths draw people. People draw noise Noise draws consequences. I slept on the slope, wedged between stone and root, uncomfortable enough that I woke every hour. That's fine. Short sleep keeps dreams from stitching narratives together. Narratives are how you convince yourself you're headed somewhere. Morning came gray and directionless. I drank sparingly from the last of what I carried and didn't replace it yet. I wanted to feel the edge of that constraint before solving it. Solutions chosen too early turn into habits. As I moved again, I noticed something else had changed. My thinking had flattened. Not in the bad way, in a narrow way. I wasn't projecting days ahead anymore. I wasn't replaying interactions or rehearsing contingencies. My world had shrunk to what the ground would accept in the next 5 steps. That's the correct scale. 10th rule holds because the land doesn't need to cooperate to keep you alive. It only needs to refuse to organize itself for you. As long as it keeps doing that, breaking roots, scattering sound, denying clean edges, I can keep moving without becoming part of anyone's plan. Tomorrow, I'll find water again. Not because I need it desperately, but because choosing it late keeps it from choosing me. 11th rule. When pressure fades, don't replace it with purpose. I found water late. Not where it wanted to be found. Not in a stream bed or hollow where ground advertises flow. It seeped out of a rock face halfway down the dry slope, just enough to darken stone and collect in a shallow crease before disappearing again. No sound, no reflection, no path worn toward it. That's the kind that lasts. I drank slow, filtering through cloth and patience, letting thirst ease without letting relief take over. Relief makes you linger. Lingering is how places start to matter. I stayed there longer than necessary, but not long enough to rest fully. There's a difference. Rest ends with comfort. Waiting ends with decision. I left while the ground still felt indifferent. The engines didn't come back that day. That absence could mean consolidation, rerouting, or failure somewhere else. It doesn't matter which. All of them reduce outward pressure temporarily. Temporary relief is the most dangerous state. It creates space for ambition. I felt it in myself by afternoon. The urge to do something, build a windbreak, improve the water catch, clear a sleeping spot that wouldn't bruise my hip every time I rolled. All reasonable, all unnecessary, all beginnings. I shut that down by moving again. Not far. Just enough to break the conversation my mind was trying to start with the land. Purpose turns places into projects. Projects turn into anchors. I crossed another faint human route just before dusk. This one was fresher. Leaves still creased. Soil still dark. It angled toward the basin I'd avoided the night before. Water draws convergence even when you don't see it yet. I didn't curse my choice. Avoidance isn't about being right. It's about not being present when right and wrong stop mattering. I slept shallow again, tucked into a crease between 2 fallen trunks where the ground sloped just enough to discourage stopping but not enough to force movement. My body complained. Good. Complaints keep you from settling. In the night I heard something that made me freeze. Not engines. Not voices. Metal. A dull, distant impact followed by a second a few seconds later. Too regular for accident. Too spaced for construction. Someone testing something heavy. Or someone closing something. Downstream. I didn't move until full light. Morning brought a shift in the air. Cooler. Cleaner. The kind of change that follows rain far away or water release nearby. The forest smelled rearranged, like a system had reset a valve. That told me enough. Whatever corridor the greenhouse fed into was no longer expanding blindly. Something had constrained it. People don't stop moving machines unless something pushes back harder than curiosity. That doesn't mean safety. It means redistribution. Redistribution sends ripples into places that weren't part of the original plan. I need to be ahead of those ripples. I moved uphill through broken ground that resisted smooth travel. Ankles complained. Calves burned. That's acceptable. Pain is linear. Surprise is exponential. Near midday I reached a stretch of terrain that felt blank again. No routes. No sound channels. No obvious water. No vantage worth stopping at. I sat there and did nothing for a long time. Not listening for something. Just letting the absence stay absent. 11th rule stands because purpose is seductive when threat recedes. You start inventing reasons to stop, to build, to claim. I don't need a reason right now. I need continued irrelevance. Tomorrow will decide nothing. And that's exactly what I want. 12th rule. Survival ends when you start explaining it to yourself. This is the final part of the record. I woke before light, not because something disturbed me, but because my body stopped needing permission to move. That's the point where routine is dissolved without being replaced. No schedule. No system voice in my head asking for checks or counts. Just readiness. I stayed where I was until the forest finished waking, not listening for threats, listening for rhythm. Birds returned unevenly. Wind shifted once, then held. The ground cooled and warmed without complaint. Nothing layered on top of itself. Blank terrain again. I moved when the light flattened enough that direction stopped mattering. No destination, no avoidance pattern. Just choosing ground that required attention but didn't reward it with progress. Water came when it came. Another seep, lower this time, slower. I drank and moved on without marking it in my head. If I remember where it is, it becomes something I might return to. Return is how loops start. Around midday, I crossed the edge of something old. Not a trail, not infrastructure. Just land that had once been worked lightly. Stones moved, soil compacted long ago, then abandoned before it could become useful. Whatever project died here did so early enough that the forest never learned its shape. I paused there longer than usual. Not because it offered anything, but because it didn't. No pull forward, no resistance. A neutral patch in a landscape that increasingly feels like it's being sorted by other people's needs. I didn't build. I didn't rest properly. I didn't name it. I passed through. In the afternoon, distant sound came again. Engines, but muted, reorganized. Not expanding, not collapsing, redistributed. Someone somewhere solved a problem and moved on. That matters less now than it would have a week ago. Because I'm no longer inside their problem space. I don't know where the greenhouse is anymore in relation to me. I could guess, but guessing would be the first step toward caring. I won't. The glass will break or be repaired. The rose will be replanted or stripped. The place will either be absorbed or abandoned. Both outcomes erase me equally well. That's enough. As evening approached, I found a place to stop that had no features worth recording, no shelter worth improving, no resource worth defending. Just ground that. Let me sit without sliding and sleep without planning. That's where I am now. I'm not hiding. I'm not waiting. I'm not establishing anything. I'm moving through environments that don't need me and don't notice when I leave. I'm letting systems collapse, rebuild, and reroute without trying to position myself inside them. The dead still exist. Somewhere. They always will. They're background pressure now, like weather, something you account for without shaping your life around. Living people are the variable that matters, not because they're hostile by default, but because they solve problems until they become them. I won't be part of a solution again. Not water. Not glass. Not height. Not shelter. Just margin. Margin that shrinks and expands with the day, never accumulating enough to be worth taking. If this record stops here, it's not because I reach safety. It's because safety is a word people use when they think the rules have stabilized. They haven't. And as long as they don't, I'll keep doing the only thing that's worked across every place I've outlived. Stay unclaimed. Stay unread. Stay irrelevant. That's not an ending. That's maintenance.